Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Hello there, welcome to The Inner Edge today with myself, Shane Craddock. I hope wherever you are in the world, you are good and that you're in good health and that you're here in good spirits. Good spirits is important. The last episode I spoke about using thought more consciously than thought uses you. Thought is a fantastic tool, but it's very sneaky, and particularly without awareness, it can cause problems. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about one example actually of thought being sneaky, just in a fun way. And it's about your inner slave driver. And we're going to talk about perhaps the possibility of you firing that inner slave driver, because it is in there for a lot of people, especially if you're an achiever. And this is something that's come up in different ways with different clients over the years. I've seen it in myself, without doubt. And I have fired my inner slave driver, but sometimes he will still try to get a little bit of control. And I guess one of the simple ways that I could, just in terms of sharing maybe an element or metaphor around this, would be, I know a lot of people who have gone into business for themselves because they hated working for other people, or maybe they had a tyrant boss or tyrant bosses. And in a funny way, and I've seen this myself, that, why'd you go working for yourself? Well, I wanted to be in charge of my own destiny, be my own boss. Only to realize that I ended up working for a bigger tyrant than anyone I ever met before, i.e. me, i.e. my inner slave driver. And I think most achievers do have an inner slave driver. And if you're listening to this kind of podcast, my guess is that you're a striver, you're an achiever, and you're looking to get the best out of yourself and your life. Great. And sometimes that inner slave driver perhaps is the thing that actually drives you to achieve success. So there are certain good elements to it where I'll just say, listen, I don't care if you're feeling sorry for yourself. I don't care if you're feeling scared. I don't care if you're feeling pain. Push through it. And without a doubt, a lot of achievers and very successful entrepreneurs will actually say that ultimately that inner voice is kind of what drove them, this intensity to succeed. But ultimately, at some point, if that inner slave driver isn't tamed or isn't managed, it will kind of bite you in the ass because you become subservient to its whim. So even, and I've seen this before with very, very successful, wealthy people, that they just haven't managed to control their inner slave driver. And so when they achieve the top of the mountain, it's still there. And it's just driving them nuts. Now, on a kind of a side example, I remember working with a client who very smart in her industry. She was in kind of a creative industry, but she was a very accomplished triathlete in a kind of an amateur sense. Like, she would have won prizes and races and things like that. And I remember we were talking about the inner voice, and she shared with me a couple of stories where the inner voice, the inner slave driver, that aspect of her mind, had gotten out of control. And she was kind of overexerting herself in competitions. But she just had this habit whenever inner voice started to say, oh, hang on, and this is dangerous. She had the habit of overriding it and saying STFU, as in shut the F up, right? You can figure out the other words yourself, and just push through. And she ended up causing some very serious physical damage that 10 years later, she's still dealing with, like pretty serious stuff now. And she said that came from just pushing through when she shouldn't have. So it's not that your inner voice, and it's not that you shouldn't override your inner voice. But in this case, her inner voice was probably her own intuition. It wasn't the kind of the scaredy cat part. It was actually your intuition saying, please stop. You're now about to cause us some serious problems. And unfortunately, she didn't listen to her intuition, her own wisdom. Let's get that distinction right between, well, what is my wisdom? What's my intuition? And what is my inner slave driver, perhaps? Now, this can kind of come into lots of different things. So she's talking about, for example, a hobby which kind of got out of control. Same way you can overdo going to the gym. You can overdo your food and your diet and your nutrition. You can overdo exercise. You can overdo sales calls. You can overdo work. You know, I'm still not there. I'm still not there. It's not good enough. We need to do more. And again, it's trying to get that fine balance between, I'm not saying that we don't do work, because obviously it's key, but it's just to understand, when is my inner slave driver kicking in? Now, generally, in my respect, in my view, in my experience, it would kick in. It can get very myopic when you're obsessed with a goal, or maybe you're really tired, or you're upset, or you're highly stressed. And without a doubt, I would have seen it in myself, and I've seen this with a lot of my clients, where a workaholic approach comes in. And so certainly I'm definitely a reformed workaholic. My inner slave driver would say, no, you got to do more. You got to do more. Work, work, work. And I came to realize in time, just from the consequences of doing that, that it created problems. I had blinkers on. You get less strategic, and then you start dropping the ball on things like health, relationships. And luckily for me, I would have seen this a long time ago, and I've had the opportunity to say, oh, there is an inner slave driver, and they do need to be managed like everything else, everything in moderation. Because if you're not careful, you'll miss out on life and what life has to offer. And I think when your inner slave driver takes over, or if there's mutiny on the bounty and you go through a period where it's taken over, the main indicator is that it saps the enjoyment out of your life and your work, because you have to do this and you have to do that. And it's just pressure. And I think the main variable then of the inner slave driver is tension. An increase in tension is probably a clue that the inner slave driver is lurking somewhere around in the hidden shadows of your mind. And when it's there, even good things can be compromised by it. I remember another client who, on the outside looking in, we would say they had everything, and people would say, well, they definitely have a great life. They should definitely feel happy. But their inner slave driver had a story which essentially said, no, you don't deserve to be happy yet. You just don't deserve it. It was conditional. It was bringing in conditions that, no, okay, you can't feel happy until this happens, and this happens, and this happens. Now, they didn't really realize that that was there. So as we explored through some conversations, about this area, they realized, oh my God, it's there. I didn't realize it was there. How do I tame it? Bizarrely, just by knowing it's there is the real key to taming it and firing it. Because whenever it kicks in, you have a choice then as to ignore it. And you kind of know then, after a bit of time and experiencing the feeling of it, or the feeling that comes with it, you kind of know, oh, I'm going to ignore that. Now, I will say two important things here, just in case you're coming into this podcast fresh, you've never listened to me before. Something that I would say very early on in my book, The Inner CEO, and something that I say very, very early on in this podcast, whatever you call it, series, The Inner Edge, is that the first thing is, you're not your inner voice. You have one. You're not your inner voice. You have one. And your inner voice is coming from your mind. And in the same way, you're not your mind. You have one. So I'll say, well, you have a phone, a credible tool, but you're not your phone, are you? No, of course not. That's silly. Yeah, but you also have a mind. It's intangible, but you have one, but it's not you. It's a data gathering machine, in a way, just like your phone, just like a computer. But you're the awareness behind your thinking. You're the awareness behind that voice. You're the awareness behind your mind. You're the observer of the mind. That's what I call the inner CEO. And so it's important to understand that your inner slave driver is one aspect that feeds into your inner voice team. And the inner slave driver team is coming from one part of your mind. Now, it's not for today to say, well, what is that? Where is it coming from? All you need to know really is that it's coming from your mind. And if it's not serving you to your highest ability, to your highest level of life, to your best you, well, then it's not worth listening to. So it definitely is there for a lot of people, particularly if you're an achiever, because the inner slave driver will always say, well, we achieved this, but that's not good enough. Let's go for more. And it's never satisfied with whatever you have. It always wants more experiences, more events, more activities, more busyness, more money, more awards, more success, more recognition, more. So what about you? Where is your inner voice whipping you? Where's that inner slave driver hanging out? It's more than likely there somewhere. So it's worth, I think, doing this exercise, taking a blank page over the next 24 hours, drawing a circle right in the center, put in inner slave driver in the middle of that circle, and then off that draw a spider diagram with like my work, money, health, hobbies, relationships, my life, how I think, and just start to brainstorm, where might the inner slave driver be applying pressure and whipping you? Look for the tension. Look for the pressure. Because if you're looking to get the best out of yourself, really you got to, I think about managing that slave driver, or even better, firing it. Because if you can fire your inner slave driver, it means you'll start leading with more meaning and more purpose, and you'll be less affected actually with tension and pressure. And tension is the enemy of high performance in all aspects of work and life and sport. So surely this is worth digging around for and ultimately firing that inner slave driver. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.